All right, what's going on, everyone? Today we are discussing perception and listening. This is going to be day one of two on this topic because for day two we're going to get specifically into Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven with regard to sort of getting through and really digging into the imagery and the symbols in that poem as far as our perception of it. So today's this video specifically, is going to be a little bit short because there's two additional videos that I'm going to post on the last slide that I want you to watch. And so just make sure that you watch them. I'll put them down in the notes below for the YouTube the YouTube notes. But make sure you watch both of those. And I'll also I'll talk a little bit about each of them on the last slide. But it's just sort of important to understand this idea of perception along the lines of not only understanding how I perceive something, but also how somebody intended something. Intent does matter. And it matters because there's 7 billion people in the world, right? And we all come from different experiences. And so my perception of somebody else's, use of a word or symbolism in a poem, as we'll see in The Raven, my perception could be drastically different. All right. And so that's really what we're getting at today, is just to understand how people might have different perceptions of the world than we do. And, hopefully we can all be a little bit more empathetic to people who see things differently than us. All right, so perception, the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting sensory information. All right, so again, based on our experiences and our biases, we are going to perceive the world differently than other individuals. All right, that's the big thing that I want you to get out of this slide today. Just because you walk around, because someone has different ideas than you, somebody has different political beliefs than you, someone has different religious views than you, doesn't mean they're a bad person. It's just that they have selected, organized, and interpreted sensory information different than you. They might have access to different information. They might have access to different evidence, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about this in the subsequent slides. But we've all seen some of these illusions, maybe in a psychology class before. But as far as this picture is concerned, depending on what you're thinking about or where you're looking, you're either going to see the face of a young woman or you're going to see the face of an old woman. All right. And so you can so metaphorically, we can all look at the same news event, and based on our experiences, where we're coming from, our mood that day, we're going to look at a news event and we're going to have different opinions of what happened with regard to that news event than maybe the person sitting on the couch next to us. We all have this experience where we see a 5-minute news clip about a horrific killing, right? And all of a sudden, the person sitting on the couch next to us thinks that the person is guilty, and you sit there and think that the person who did the killing was justified, right? As far as a self-defense motivation. And in reality, neither one of us know what happened. Like, neither one of us were there sort of as this event unfolded. All right. We've seen this a lot in the last year with regard to some of the stuff with like our politics are very divisive. We all come to different opinions on political topics, on news topics, because we have, different experiences and different biases. And in reality, most of us don't know that much information about anything, right? We think we have an opinion on tax policy or immigration. In reality, it's like we just sit around and, repeat whatever we heard on the cable news channel that we like to listen to, right? Most people don't actually dig into and read immigration bills, tax policy bills. Most people don't understand economics at a deep enough level to understand, how tax policy affects minimum wage, inflation, GDP, etc. We just kind of say, well, my favorite news anchor said this thing, and so I'm just going to go repeat it. All right. That's how two people can come to very drastically different conclusions about news events. So let's check out this young woman, old woman illusion. All right. So some people say they can't see both of them, right? So if you take this as a nose and this as a mouth, right? And here's an eye looking this way, and here's another eye looking this way. Hopefully now you can see the old woman. And if you're a person who can't see the young woman would be as follows. If this is her nose and her eye, and it's kind of looking away, this is her jawline, and maybe this is like a necklace. All right. So there you have it. Old woman, young woman, illusion. Part of perception has to do with selection. All right. So again, we get back to this idea of how is it that two people who live in the exact same country come to drastically different conclusions about what's happening politically, right? You know, half the country voted for one presidential candidate, the other half voted for the other presidential candidate. And you look at that and say, how does half the country have a drastically different opinion than I do with regard to who should be president? Okay, well, part of it has to do with selection. So if you just watch Fox News or MSNBC, right, you probably have a different worldview based on what you're exposed to. So again, you watch Fox News all day, they're going to say Trump is amazing, Trump did a great job, you should have voted for Trump in 2020. You watch MSNBC 24 hours a day, and it's going to be, you can't vote for Trump anymore, we have to get him out, like, you know, Joe Biden, you know, he might not be the best candidate, but like we'll take anybody except for Trump, right? So of course you have this very polarized view of who should and shouldn't be president simply based on selection. And most of us, when it comes to the news, there's some really interesting conclusions that have been reached out there by people who do research media and really dig into it. When it comes to consuming the news, most of us don't consume the news. We think we do, right? It's like I turned on Fox News or MSNBC. I think I'm consuming the news. That's not why I think I'm learning something by going to a news channel or going onto Twitter or Facebook. That's not what we're doing. What most people do is they actually go to their preferred news channel to confirm the biases they already have, right? I don't need to turn on Fox News to tell you exactly what Fox News is going to say every night for 4 hours in prime time. You don't have to turn on MSNBC to know exactly what MSNBC is going to say 4 hours every night in prime time. We already know what these new news organizations are going to say. Same thing with Twitter accounts. There's certain journalists who we know are partisan, right? I don't need to follow those journalists to tell me, you know, what they, you know, to learn something new about former President Trump or current President Biden. I already know what these people are going to say about these individuals, right? I go to news outlets. Most people now go to news outlets to have their biases confirmed by people in positions of authority. All right. If I like Trump, I don't need to turn on Fox News to learn something about Trump. I just turn on Fox News because I want to hear people in positions of authority tell me that Trump is great. And so I don't feel weird about liking Trump, right? If I like Biden, I don't go to MSNBC to learn new things about Biden. It's like I go to MSNBC to have my biases confirm that Biden's awesome and Trump is a horrible person, right? That's all we're doing when it comes to why we watch the news. So when it comes to selection, our perception has to do with what we select to sort of come into our heads. And this is why, you know, consuming good quality information is so important. All right, because it's just going to sort of turn over and it's going to, you know, either confirm our biases or it's going to undermine our biases. We can choose to read things that will actually get us to learn something, or we can just continue to read things and view things that just confirm the biases we already have. Right? It makes no sense. Again, it makes no sense to watch 4 hours of cable news every night if it's just telling you what you already know. Again, I can tell you everything that Fox News and MSNBC is going to say every night if you just tell me, like, here's the major news story for today. Okay, MSNBC is going to say it's awesome, Fox is going to say it's terrible, or vice versa. All right, so this is how we select things. Selective exposure. What do you subject yourself to, right? So again, if you only follow Democrats on Twitter, of course, like all you're going to be able to do is parrot Democrat talking points. All right, that's all you're going to be able to do. So don't tell me that this is my original opinion and this is the hard conclusion that I came to after consuming all the evidence. It's like, no, you just followed one political party and this is what all those people told you. You don't have an original thought. You're just sort of mimicking what other people have already said. All right, and you selectively exposed yourself to talking points on one side. All right. If you wanted to come to an actual conclusion, what you do is like 50% of the people you follow on Twitter would be Democrats, the other 50% would be Republicans, and you would have to kind of wrestle around with it, right? Same thing with the books you read, right? If you are a person who says, like, I really do enjoy political biographies, well, you have to make sure that you have read political biographies of people from all across the political spectrum. You can't just say, like, political biographies are great. By the way, I'm only reading Obama's books. Well, then you're just going to have these things confirmed for you if you don't read people's books who you disagree with. All right. Selective attention. So maybe you do listen to people who you disagree with, but you think about like, who am I really paying attention to? So, for instance, if President Trump gives an hour-long speech, you might only hear the good stuff that he says because you like him. You just kind of ignore the stuff that you don't like. Selective attention could also be, when President Trump and Biden were having their debates. Maybe you were a Biden fan and you said, okay, I know both of them are talking. Like, I'm here, I'm exposing myself to Trump's ideas, but I'm only really paying attention to Joe Biden because I already know I'm going to vote for him. I really like him. All right. So you have to make sure that you're critically engaged with the material as opposed to, yeah, there's noise with things I disagree with on in the background, but I'm not really paying attention to it. I'm only paying attention to stuff I already agree with. All right, that's how some of us operate when it comes to like presidential debates, for instance. It's like we only listen to our candidate that we already like. Okay, and finally, selective retention. So, what do you save long term? All right, so if you give a speech to 100 people, but you only hear 3 negative criticisms, those might be the criticisms that you hold on to. All right. And you completely forget about the fact that 97% of the people who watch your speech might have liked it, but most of us have this sort of bias towards negativity, and so we get really stuck on like the 3 people who didn't like our Facebook post, right? As opposed to a lot of people who did. All right. So selective retention is, what do we take with us long term? Organization, as far as how do we organize ourselves in the world. So we have this schemata, schemas, right? We organize knowledge and information into clusters because there's too much information to deal with in the world. So this is why the human brain stereotypes. Now, again, usually we think of stereotyping as this sort of like negative thing, especially when it's applied to people, right? But stereotyping just means that we take things that are like other things and we sort of just cluster them all together, right? So you do this with, not in regards to people, like cars, all right? We all kind of know what a car is, but we're going to see a new car at some point, and we're just going to kind of know that it belongs in the cluster of cars because it has, 4 wheels, right? We're like, okay, 4 wheels and a body, it holds like 4 people in it. That's a car. I can kind of put that in my cluster of what a car is as far as organizing the world around us. You might go out in the world and you're going to see a bird you've never seen before, but it's a bird, right? Because it's flying, it has 2 wings, right? It's about as big as your hand, right? You're like, okay, I can put that in category of birds because I know a bird. You cluster things together because you can't learn every individual fact about every individual topic, all right? So this is how we sort of organize the world around us. Now, obviously, it becomes a problem when we do this with people, right? With regard to like, gender categories, racial categories, class categories, but also, if we go back to the last slide, political categories, right? So this is a huge problem with this sort of division that we're seeing right now in the country, is that if someone tells you, I voted for Donald Trump in 2020, you cluster them and you sort of make all these other assumptions about them, right? That may or may not be true. All right, so you stereotype them based on one piece of information, right? Again, you see an animal with 2 wings that's flying around, you're like, okay, that's a bird, I'm going to put that in the bird category. If you see one person and they say one fact, like, I voted for Donald Trump, then all of a sudden you say, I'm going to put you in the Trump category, and here's all these things that I really hate about Donald Trump, and I'll support, right? It's like, well, you only know one piece of information about that person, right? So you can't assume everything else about the person just based on one fact with regard to, are they a registered Republican, Democrat, right? But that's unfortunately what we do, and that makes things very, very divisive because we get to this place where we don't ask people why it is they voted for certain candidates, right? We get to this place where it's like, you voted for Trump, you must be like an alt-right white supremacist, and I'm like, I think like 78 million people, something like that, right? Let's say 75, let's round down. I don't think 75 million Americans are like alt-right white nationalists. Okay, I think there's like 80 million people who voted for Biden, somewhere around there. All right, and people, if you don't like Democrats, socialist, unpatriotic, whatever. Like, I don't think 80 million Americans are, far left, socialist, Antifa, whatever, right? But we get very, very polarized. We watch our news organizations and we know one piece of information about someone with regard to who they voted for, and we either put them in this sort of like alt-right Nazi camp, right? Or we put them in this like far left Antifa, burn everything down to the ground camp, right? And it's like, well, that's probably not how that individual is, right? We probably have a lot more in common with our neighbor who voted differently than us than we are willing to recognize, Okay, so you got to be careful about stereotyping, obviously. Okay, social identity theory. This is super cool. All right, we view our in groups more positively than our out groups, obviously. But this is what's interesting about social identity theory. When it comes to social identity theory, what this looks at is when I outwardly condemn someone who is in my out group. All right, so um, let's say that I voted for Biden and I don't like Trump. Okay, let's just assume this for a second. When I post something on social media that says Trump is a horrible person, right? What social identity theory has found is that I'm not necessarily doing that to bash on Trump voters. What I'm really doing is I'm virtue signaling to other people who are like me that voted for Biden to let them know, like, no, 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 keep me in your group, keep me in your group, keep me in your group. Look, I am willing to sort of stand up for the family, right? I'm willing to stand up for our cause. So when we do these sort of like large virtue signaling things, right? We post something on social media. It's rarely that we're doing that to upset the people of the out group. When we verbalize or post something on social media that is divisive or political, usually it's to signal to our in group, I'm a good person on the in group. Please don't kick me out of this group, because we are social. We are social animals. We like the fact that we can be a part of a group. All right, and whether that's you want to be in good graces with your family, people join churches, people join various like fraternal organizations, like these local community centers, right? Like people join organizations because they want community, and once you join an organization, that organization has various rules and values, and so to sort of show the organization that I am with you, right? There are moments when we feel compelled to castigate those who are outside of our group, right? If we think of it less politically, think of it like sports teams, right? Penn State versus Ohio State. It's like, I'm going to wear my Penn State jersey, not necessarily to say like, Ohio State, I don't like you. It's like, I wear my Penn State jersey to let other people in the Penn State community know, like, I'm a strong Penn Stater. Keep me around. Don't kick me out. Like, this is my fan base. All right. We want to feel a part of the Penn State family and community, right? And sometimes we do that by like talking garbage about Ohio State. All right. And again, it's very rarely about the out groups with regard to when I malign people on the outside. It's usually when I malign people on the outside of my group, it's usually this sort of like backdoor way for me to tell my in group, look, I'm safe, I'm cool, I'm down for the cause, I'm always going to be here with you. All right, we are showing our loyalty when we castigate people on the outside. All right. However, this can lead to groupthink. We'll talk a little bit more about groupthink in later conversations, but the short of it is that groupthink is when you're in a group and everybody already agrees on like who to vote for. Let's just go to that because it's easy, right? If we're all sitting around and we're like, Biden's awesome and Trump sucks. Groupthink is when we stop thinking critically about the issues, and instead of actually having a hard, intelligent conversation about tax policy, we all just start sitting around and saying like, Trump sucks, Trump sucks. It becomes very junior high, right? So in order to avoid groupthink, what you want to do is you want to always be that one person in your group where you say, look, I know that we all agree on politics, but let me just play devil's advocate. Let's just assume that Trump has a better tax policy, right? So I'm going to try to argue for the other side very, very rigorously and make all the people on my side defend the position that we already agree with. So that's what happens with groupthink is, oh, we reached a conclusion and now we're not going to be intelligent anymore. We're just going to like be junior high, right? And we're going to like make fun of the people who don't have our conclusion. So we're no longer thinking hard about these topics. We just kind of stop learning because it's like, oh, we already know the answer. It's like, we don't know the answer. We all know that we agree on the solution, but we haven't really thought about it because no one's playing devil's advocate trying to challenge us. So you always want people in your group who are going to challenge your solutions as opposed to just a bunch of people sitting around you saying, yes, yes, that's correct, that's correct. Because if everyone's just saying, yes, that's correct, no one's coming in from the outside to challenge us. Scripts, we all follow scripts in our lives, and what this means is that we all behave in ways in which we think we are supposed to behave based on, mimicking behavior. So it's like, I don't have a kid, But one day if I do have a kid, it's like, how do I be a dad? I don't know. You start thinking like, okay, who do I know that's a dad? How do they act and how do they behave? And I try to sort of mimic and follow those scripts. You can also think about make a timeline for yourself and how your life is supposed to unfold. And after you make that timeline, you look at it and you're like, why do I think this? It's like, oh, because I see things on TV, I follow my friends and family, I look at classmates of mine, right? So it's like, okay, you're 18, you just graduated high school, what do you do? Most people are like, go to college. And you're like, why? Right? You can go to college later if you want. You can take a year off. You can go join the military for a while. You can go work until you're 30. You can go to college when you're 30 for the first time, right? But we all create these scripts for ourselves. Like, okay, by the time I'm 18, I got to go to college. And then when I'm 25, I need to be at least partnered up with the person that I'm going to marry, be married and have my first kid by the time I'm 30. And then I'm going to work until I'm 65. And then I'm going to retire. And then I'm going to go to Florida, right? And it's like we know kind of how we're supposed to behave based on these larger cultural scripts. And once we write that out and realize kind of how predictable this is, we can also realize that no, plenty of people have lived their life in other ways. Some people have waited to go to college. Some people get married at 18, right? Some people get married at 40. Some people have kids. Some people don't have kids. Some people retire. Some people work until they're 90 years old because they love their job, right? You can go to college. You can take a year off, right? So once we sort of like look at these scripts that are laid in front of us, we can start to realize that these are things that other people create. There's other ways in which I can live my life. All right. So just kind of know that stereotypes are things we fall into, social identity, things we fall into, scripts, things we fall into. And once we are cognizant of this, we can sort of do some self-reflection and realize like, oh, this is the box I've been placed into. I can break out of the box. All right. That's a very liberating moment. All right, interpretation. I'm going to do an entire like separate outside of class discussion on internal, external attributions as far as interpretation. But here's the big thing you need to know. All right, when it comes to things that happen to us in life, there are internal and there are external attributions. And what this means is that my behavior or what happens to me in life is based on personal characteristics, so my own behavior, right? As far as internal attributions, things that happen in my life are based on how I behave. External attributions are things happen in my life because of outside factors. Other people cause those things to happen to me. All right. So what I'd like you to do is, think about something in your life that is not going well at the moment. What are the internal attributions? What are the external attributions? So let's say that you're failing classes right now. Internal attributions: I'm not studying, I'm not showing up to my classes, I'm not turning in my homework on time. External attributions could be, it's COVID, I have to share a computer with my siblings because we're all on Zoom. My teacher is a terrible teacher, right? They're giving me bad grades. All right. So I'm not downplaying the fact that there are external attributions that make people's lives difficult. Now, what I'm going to tell you right now is not going to be fun, right? And again, I'll make an entire video about this separately, just for general use. But external attributions you cannot control. So we get into the discussions of stoicism in some of my classes. It's a recognition that like bad things are going to happen. You have no control over them, right? The only thing you have control over are your internal attributions. So if you're failing your classes, and it's a combination of both, right? You might not be studying, turning your homework on time. Your teacher might be terrible, right? You might not like me as a teacher, okay? All right, you want to be the first. So you might have, teacher might be terrible. Teacher might not be clear in the syllabus. COVID's happening, right? These are external things. Of all the things that are happening, what's the only thing that you can change right now? Right? That's the question. That's the Stoic philosophy question. Of all the bad things that are happening, of all the things that are going bad, what are the only things that you can change right now, today? The only thing you can change are those internal attributions. So if you're doing bad in class, you can sit there and write me a mean, nasty manifesto email of all the ways I'm terrible a teacher, or you could crack open a textbook. Right? You could go back to some of the PowerPoint slides. You could get a head start on your paper, right? Those things you can control right now. So what I tell people, all the people that I come in contact with, is that, yeah, sometimes the external world is terrible to you for lots of different reasons, right? But you can't control it, right? And your life will be much better off if you just constantly evaluate the internal attributions, right? If you constantly evaluate what are the things that I'm doing wrong, right? If you do that. Now, that doesn't mean their situation is going to change. It might mean that external barriers are still in your way, right? But you need to do as much as you can to better yourself, right? Because that's what you can control right now and today, right? You can't control the big systemic reasons as to why the world's falling apart around you. Those external reasons might never change, right? Or they might not change in your lifetime. Or maybe they're going to change in 10 years. But in that 10 years of you waiting for external attributions to change, you could have done a lot for yourself to get prepared for that moment. Now the door's open in 10 years. Now I can walk through the door. If you just sit around saying external change, external change, external change, when that door finally flies open, they say, okay, you're welcome in here. And you sit back and say, oh, I just spent the last 10 years complaining and I didn't better myself, read my textbooks, get the best grades I could, work on my relationships, get in shape, like if there's some sort of diet exercise plan you want to get on, right? There's a lot of external attributes that are terrible, right? I'm not downplaying that. But what I'm saying is you just got to control what you can control, all right? And sometimes that means recognizing that, you're going to do everything right and it's still not, and your life is still not going to go the way you want it, okay? It's a hard fact of everybody's life, not just yours. However, you feel more of a sense of agency if you constantly evaluate the internal attributes. Every day, do what you can, control what you can. Don't worry about the external stuff. All right, and finally, interpretation with regard to who decides. There's 2 YouTube clips. This is a 30-minute lecture that I give for my 300 level comm theory class on symbolic interaction, and it's about how meanings change, right? So for various words and symbols, they change, they evolve. And then I want you to watch this little 13-minute lecture from this academic at Columbia who's a linguist. His name is John McWhorter. And it's an hour-long discussion, but you only need to watch like 13 minutes of it. But he talks about how words evolve and change, right? So our perceptions change because language changes. And he really gets into the part in here in this 13-minute conversation, this 13-minute section of this like longer hour-long lecture. Is he's talking about Shakespeare. And he's talking about why Shakespeare is so difficult to read today as opposed to 500 years ago, right? When people read Shakespeare now, they're like, Shakespeare's really hard to read. It's hard to read, not because the story has changed. It's hard to read because the words themselves have changed the definitions of the meaning. Their meanings have changed, right? So you start reading Shakespeare and you get to a word and you're like, that word doesn't fit here. Well, the word fit there 500 years ago. It's just that the definition has changed. And so now we're struggling to figure out, like, is that the correct word? Or do I need to figure out what the definition of this word was 500 years ago? So our perception changes based on how words have evolved. Right? In this video, I get into, this is why things like censorship are sort of in the long term, censorship's nonsensical. Because you can censor a word today, but, 5, 10, 20 years from now, that word might have a totally different definition. Or you can censor a word today and say, Josh, that word is a bigoted word. Don't use that word. Well, guess what I'm going to do? Like, if I'm a horrible person, I'm going to create a new word to mean that thing that I wanted to mean. Because the word itself isn't a bad word. It's the idea in my head that's a bad idea. And so if you're not going to let me use one word to get this bad idea out, I'm going to use a different word to get this bad idea out, right? We see this with like nonverbal signs too, right? Like nonverbal symbols, they change their meaning. I give some examples with regard to like how what we now know as the swastika for Nazis, how that, that's that symbol is thousands of years old. That doesn't mean what it currently means, right? Throughout the 20th century and into the 21st century, right? This like nasty meaning we attach to it is only about 100 years old, right? It's a symbol that's been around for a very long time, right? And it changes and it evolves, okay? So you get to this question of like who decides what the correct interpretation is, and the question gets a little complicated. So watch both these YouTube clips, and I will see you next time.